So we've just talked about the idea of problem solving. And problem solving is a technique that we use to continually improve a process, to bring the standard back, the performance back to a standard level of outcome. Now, continual improvement begins with standards. Dr. Duran made the comment. He said, without a standard, there is no logical basis for making a decision or taking an action. In other words, what standards are doing is they're providing a foundation for improvement. So when we think about standard work are those work instructions. They're defining the best practice for performing a production activity or delivering a service. And it's implemented in a way that assures that all employees who are engaged in that practice can do the work in order to deliver value to the customers as specified by the practice. Now that sounds pretty straightforward. Okay, so as we look at it, that would be the specification for work, the work process, the work procedures, the tasks that are being performed. However, as we look at this, we see there can be many best ways to do things. I have my best way, you have your best way, somebody else has their best way, and what we start seeing is all of a sudden we've diverged in terms of how we're actually doing the work. So the idea that started industrial engineering in terms of its modern approach came from Frederick Winslow Taylor, and he said there should be one best way for doing the work. And the Gilbrists worked on how do we do this one best way, and they were studying those work activities. So standard work is a detailed definition of the most efficient way to produce a product or to perform a service where we have balanced flow and we achieve the desired quality of the output. We break that work down into elements, we sequence them, we organize them, and then we repeatedly follow that process. The result of this is consistent outcomes. Standard work should be able to produce the required product demand at the lowest total cost with a minimal delay and defects as well. It should also be scientifically designed, that the description of the standard work should be updated using scientific methods to study the work that we're doing. And this is what industrial engineers do. We bring science and statistics and engineering concepts to analyzing that work, to understand each of the components, and then how do we seek ways to challenge ourselves to do that work better. Thus, in addition, it has to be effectively implemented. And that means that the workers accept those standards. And this becomes a very big challenge because if the workers don't understand them, they can't accept them. If the workers are not involved in creating those standards, they don't really understand them. So they won't be able to follow them. And so what we have to do is get workers who are participating in the design process, they're participating in the improvement process, they're provided the tools, methods, and equipment needed to do the job, and they're engaged in the process of deciding how to regulate or self-regulate the performance of that work. And in that way, the targets for performance achievement can actually be obtained. And they should maintain then basic standards for requirements relative to cycle time, talk time or response to incoming order rate, and the work in process inventory, or how we're actually performing the work and how much work we have that we are actually conducting at any particular point in time in terms of raw inventory, work in process, or even partially finished goods. Now, when we look at this process in Japanese management, what the Americans saw was they have a standardized do, check, act process that documents daily work. And that daily management system is very, very disciplined. In that daily management system in Japan, that's where we see most of the lean tools that are talked about in the Toyota production system. In that standardized do, check, act process, when they check the process, what they're doing is they're reflecting on the performance of the standard work. Are we doing it the right way? Are we getting the right results? And the results tell us, are we doing it the right way or not? And when we see in that check step that something is not quite right, then we go into a plan, do, check, act cycle. And this is where we engage the green belt. The beginning of that process says, what we see is when we're acting, we're not actually developing the right things. And now we have to plan to do things differently. So rather than daily management adhering to the standards of work, we're now going into the first level of change management. How can we get this process back to the standard? Or maybe improve the standard of output based on the quality of work because we're able to see it in a different way. So management of quality in the routine activities is achieved using work standards. And we learn how to manage the mess in our processes, the dirty data we see there, by standardizing the process and managing the data in a consistent manner. So now we've thought about all of these things. We have this idea of continual improvement. Now you notice I don't say continuous, because continuous improvement doesn't include the check step. Continuous improvement keeps moving. It doesn't stop and take the time to say, let's reflect now. In Japan, the check step is continual improvement, excuse me. And what they do in that continual improvement process is they check, they compare. So it's not plan, do, study, act, as some people talk about, as Dr. Deming did just a year before he died. It's a check step where I'm comparing, here's my standard work and here's what we're doing. Is there a gap? Am I actually meeting the right things? Maybe somebody's doing it better than standard work. So we should test it and see, how do we actually make that work go better for everybody? So the idea is the green belt is going to be engaged in this checking step process, in the routine work of the organization. The very first job you have coming out of school may be putting you in a supervisory function over workers and asking yourself, how do we actually do the check step? How do we say, are we doing the standard work to the expected outcome, and are there some ways we can see to do that work better? So the DMAIC process was designed to answer questions, and the DMAIC process was designed to integrate standardized Do Check Act and Plan Do Check Act into a project management approach for problem solving in work processes. So what we'll do in our next video is we'll introduce the concept of DMAIC, the 5 different milestones in project management for that, and some of the questions that we're going to ask ourselves as we try to understand how do we actually make work processes perform better. Look forward to seeing you then.